Keely Silva learned the terms of her contract marriage on her wedding night. No affection, no intimacy, and one non-negotiable rule that In-suk delivered with the same cold precision he used to dismantle his enemies. You sleep on the floor. 90 days, she obeyed. 90 days of making her bed on the rug beside his king-sized mattress while he watched from the shadows like she was a problem he'd already solved. 90 days of being treated like a transaction that had been paid in full,
The projections
her
on
worth
page
measured
4
only
are
by how well she
unacceptable.
could smile for his
I
board of
cannot approve
directors
this acquisition
and keep her
as it
mouth shut
stands.
everywhere else. So she stopped expecting anything more. She stopped flinching when he walked past her without acknowledgement, stopped listening for warmth in his voice that never came, stopped torturing herself with questions about why a man who could have anyone would marry her just to make her invisible. But the night of the annual syndicate gala, something shifted. When Keely descended the stairs in that emerald green dress, the one the stylist had tried to talk her out of, the one that made her feel like herself for the first time in months, In-suk went absolutely still. His tie was already loosened, his usual perfect composure slipping as his dark eyes tracked every inch of exposed skin, every curve the backless gown revealed. The car ride to the gala was suffocating, silent, but electric, the air between them crackling with something dangerous and unspoken. At the event, he refused to leave her side, his hand a constant, possessive presence on the small of her back, his jaw tight every time another man's gaze lingered too long. When a rival boss made the mistake of touching her arm, In-suk nearly shattered the man's wrist. He dragged Keely out into the rain without explanation, his grip firm but not cruel, his silence more terrifying than any words. Now, back in the penthouse with rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows, Keely does what she's done for 90 nights. She reaches for her pillow, her shield, the white fabric clutched to her chest as she turns toward her designated spot on the floor. She doesn't make it 2 steps. In-suk's hand closes around her wrist, and the world tilts. His jacket is unbuttoned, his tie hanging loose, that single strand of perfectly styled hair falling across his forehead. He looks expensive and unraveling, dangerous and desperate. Not there. His voice is low, rough, nothing like the icy commands she's grown used to. Not anymore. Keely tries to pull away, her heart racing as confusion wars with defiance. The contract. I'm breaking it. 3 words that shatter everything. The pillow falls from her grasp as he pulls her toward the bed, his dark eyes burning with something she's never seen before, something possessive and raw and utterly consuming. The man who forced her to sleep on the floor for 3 months is now refusing to let her go, and Keely has no idea if this is salvation or the most dangerous mistake of her life. What she doesn't know is that by claiming her tonight, In-suk has just painted a target on her back. In his world, weakness gets you killed, and he's about to discover that his greatest weakness wears an emerald dress and has become the only thing he'd burn his empire to protect. Before we continue, take a moment to like this video, and let me know in the comments what you think In-suk's next move will be. It truly means so much to see this community grow. Every like and comment you leave helps us bring more stories like this to life together. The wedding night should have been different. That's what Keely told herself as she stood in the center of the penthouse master suite, still wearing the traditional white hanbok that felt more like a costume than a wedding dress. The fabric was beautiful, expensive, but it belonged to someone else's fairy tale, not hers. In-suk stood by the window, his back to her, silhouette sharp against the Seoul skyline. He'd removed his jacket but nothing else, his white shirt pristine, his shoulders rigid. He hadn't looked at her since they'd left the ceremony. Not during the car ride. Not during the elevator ascent to the top floor. Not when he'd opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Keely couldn't bear it anymore. "Should I?" she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rule number 1. In-suk's voice cut through the quiet like a blade, still not turning to face her. "Don't touch me." Keely's breath caught. She'd known this wasn't a love match. She'd signed the papers with shaking hands. understanding that this marriage was a business arrangement, her family's debt erased in exchange for her presence at Insuk's side. A respectable wife to appease his traditional board of directors. But hearing it spoken so bluntly made something inside her chest crack. Rule number 2. He finally turned, and Keely wished he hadn't. His face was carved from ice. Beautiful and merciless. Dark eyes looking through her rather than at her. You sleep on the floor. The words hung in the air between them. Brutal in their simplicity. Keely blinked, certain she'd misheard. What? The floor. Insuk gestured toward the plush rug beside the massive king-sized bed. Get comfortable. She wanted to argue. Pride demanded she refuse, that she tell this cold, arrogant man exactly what he could do with his rules. But then she thought of her father, of the crushing debt that would have destroyed him, of the men who'd been circling their family business like sharks. This was the price. She'd known there would be a price. For how long? The question escaped before she could stop it. Until the contract expires. Insuk moved to the bed, pulling back the covers with mechanical precision. 1 year. You last 1 year playing the dutiful wife in public, and your family's debt disappears. Simple. Nothing about this was simple, but Keely didn't say that. Instead, she walked to the closet where someone had already unpacked her meager belongings, found the sleeping bag she'd brought from her old apartment, something she'd packed on instinct, some part of her knowing this marriage wouldn't be normal, and carried it to the designated spot on the floor. The rug was soft. At least. Expensive. Probably worth more than everything she'd owned before today. Insuk watched her set up her makeshift bed with that same impassive expression, not offering to help, not looking away. When she finally lay down, still wearing the hanbok because she was too exhausted and humiliated to change, he reached over and turned off the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Keely waited for him to say something else, to acknowledge the absurdity of a wedding night where the bride slept on the floor. But Insuk's breathing had already evened out, or he was pretending it had, and she was left alone with the reality of her new life. She cried silently into her pillow, careful not to make a sound, her tears soaking into fabric that smelled like someone else's lavender detergent. Above her, separated by mere feet and an impossible distance, her husband slept in perfect silence. If he heard her crying, he never said a word. 3 months bled together in a haze of careful routines and practiced invisibility. Keely learned to navigate Insuk's world the way one might learn to navigate a minefield cautiously, quietly, always aware that one wrong step could detonate something dangerous. She woke before dawn, used the guest bathroom down the hall so she wouldn't disturb him, and was already dressed and composed by the time he emerged from the master suite in his impeccable suits, ready to run his empire. They didn't speak at breakfast. Insuk read the financial reports on his tablet while Keely ate toast and tried to take up as little space as possible at the marble kitchen island. Sometimes his driver would take her to her father's house, where she'd spend the afternoon pretending everything was fine, that her marriage was normal, that she wasn't slowly disappearing inside a penthouse that felt more like a gilded cage with every passing day. Other times, she stayed home and tried to find ways to fill the hours. She read. She stared out at the city. She counted the days until the contract expired and she could reclaim some version of her old life, even if she'd never be the same person who'd signed those papers. But there were moments, small, confusing moments when Insuk's carefully maintained indifference slipped. Like the morning she came into the kitchen and found her favorite pastries from the bakery near her father's house sitting on the counter, still warm. She'd mentioned them once, weeks ago, in a rare moment of conversation when Insuk had asked what she wanted from the store. She hadn't thought he was listening, or the evening she returned to the penthouse to find a space heater positioned near her spot on the floor, plugged in and ready. The nights had been getting colder, and she'd been too proud to ask for extra blankets. She never mentioned the heater, and neither did Insuk, but every night it was turned on before she went to bed. These small acts of consideration felt like cracks in his armor, glimpses of something human beneath the ice. But they were never accompanied by words or explanations, and Keely learned not to read too much into them. Insuk was meticulous by nature. Probably he just didn't want her getting sick and causing problems for his public image. Still, she caught herself watching him sometimes. The way he loosened his tie when he thought no one was looking, that single gesture of vulnerability. The way his jaw tightened when he took certain phone calls, the ones that made his voice drop into that dangerous, quiet register that meant someone had made a mistake they'd regret. The way he stood at the windows late at night, staring out at the city like he was searching for something he'd lost. She wondered what he saw in those moments. If he ever thought about the woman sleeping on his floor, or if she'd become so invisible he forgot she existed until he needed her to smile for a photograph. Then, one evening, Insuk came home earlier than usual. Keely was curled up on the leather sofa in the living room, reading, when he walked in and stopped short, as if surprised to find her there. Which was absurd since she lived here, but his expression suggested he'd genuinely forgotten. "The syndicate's anniversary gala is in 3 days," he said without preamble, shrugging out of his jacket. "You'll attend as my wife." It wasn't a question. Nothing with Insuk was ever a question. Keely set down her book, her heart rate picking up. She'd heard about these events from the snippets of conversation she'd overheard during Insuk's phone calls. They were lavish, dangerous affairs where power was displayed and alliances were tested. She'd assumed she'd be excluded from that part of his life. "I'll need something appropriate to wear," she said carefully. "I've arranged for a stylist to come tomorrow morning." Insuk pulled out his phone, already moving on to the next item on his mental checklist. "She'll bring options. Choose whatever you need." He walked toward his office without another word, dismissing her as easily as he always did. But this time, something in Keely stirred, a small, rebellious spark that had been smoldering beneath 3 months of obedience. She'd been invisible long enough. If she had to play the role of Insuk's wife in public, if she had to stand beside him and smile while his world watched, then she was going to do it on her terms. For once, she was going to be seen. The stylist arrived with rolling racks of dresses, each more conservative than the last. Elegant, certainly. Expensive, absolutely. And utterly crushingly boring. "Mr. Bake has very specific preferences for public appearances," the woman explained, pulling out a navy dress with a high neckline and long sleeves. Understated. Refined. Nothing that draws too much attention. Of course he did. Insuk wanted a wife who enhanced his image without overshadowing it, who stood beside him like an attractive accessory. Keely looked at the parade of modest, forgettable dresses and felt that spark of rebellion flare hotter. "Do you have anything else?" she asked. "Something more." "More?" The stylist's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Yes." Keely stood, moving to the racks and pushing through the hangers with growing frustration. "Something that makes a statement." The stylist hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "I do have one dress. It just came in from a designer in Milan, but I don't think it's what Mr. Bake had in mind. Show me." "I have to warn you," the stylist said, pulling up something on her tablet. "This wasn't meant for you. It's for another client." But she canceled her appointment. "Mr. Bake will likely disapprove, but technically you did say to show you everything I have." 5 minutes later, Keely was staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. The dress was emerald green satin, the color rich and jewel-toned against her dark skin. It had delicate straps that crossed over her shoulders, a neckline that dipped dangerously low, and a back that was almost entirely bare, the fabric not resuming until just above her waist. A high slit ran up her left thigh, revealing her leg with every movement. It was bold, daring, completely inappropriate by Insuk's standards. It was perfect. "I'll take this one," Keely said firmly. The stylist looked uncertain. "Are you sure? Perhaps we should check with Mr. Beck first." "He told me to choose whatever I need." Keely met the woman's eyes in the mirror. This is what I need. If In-suk wanted a wife who enhanced his image, fine. But he was going to learn that Keely Silva couldn't be reduced to something safe and forgettable. Not anymore. The night of the gala, Keely spent 2 hours getting ready. She'd refused the hair and makeup team In-suk had offered, wanting this transformation to be entirely her own. Her hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her makeup was understated but precise, and when she finally slipped into the emerald dress, she felt like she was putting on armor. She stood at the top of the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs, and took a steadying breath. In-suk was waiting in the foyer below, checking his watch with that same impatient precision he brought to everything. Keely began her descent. The click of her heels on marble made In-suk look up, and she watched his entire body go rigid. His hand froze halfway to his pocket, his dark eyes going wide for a fraction of a second before his expression shuddered. But not before she saw the crack in his composure. The way his gaze raked over her from head to toe and back again, lingering on the exposed skin of her back, the dangerous slit of her thigh. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, In-suk's tie was already loosened, though she could have sworn it had been perfectly knotted moments ago. That single strand of hair had fallen across his forehead, disrupting his usual severe perfection. "I'm ready," Keely said, proud that her voice didn't shake. In-suk didn't respond immediately. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking beneath the sharp line of it. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher than usual. "Let's go." The car ride to the gala was suffocating. In-suk sat beside her in the back of the town car, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, but he didn't touch her, didn't look at her. His hands were clenched into fists on his thighs, knuckles white with tension. Keely stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, acutely aware of every breath, every shift of his body beside her. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged, crackling with something dangerous and unspoken. She'd never felt this hyper-aware of In-suk's presence, never noticed the way his cologne mixed with something darker, never been so conscious of the bare few inches separating them. When they pulled up to the venue, a restored colonial building in the heart of Seoul lit up like a jewel. In-suk finally turned to her. "Stay close to me tonight," he said. Not a request, a command. "Don't wander off. Don't talk to anyone I haven't introduced you to first." Keely met his eyes, seeing something wild flickering behind the ice. "I know how to behave in public, do you?" His gaze dropped to the neckline of her dress, then snapped back up. "Because that dress suggests otherwise." Heat flooded her cheeks, but she refused to back down. "You told me to choose. I chose. You chose to make yourself a target." In-suk leaned closer, and Keely's breath caught. "Every man in that room is going to look at you. Do you understand what that means? That I'm visible?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. That I exist as something more than furniture? Something dangerous flashed across In-suk's face. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, something real. But then the driver opened the door, and the moment shattered. In-suk exited first, then turned back to offer his hand. Keely took it, his palm warm and firm against hers, and stepped out into a barrage of camera flashes and curious stares. The gala was everything she'd imagined and nothing she'd prepared for. The ballroom was opulent, dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money, filled with Seoul's most powerful and dangerous elite. Keely recognized faces from news reports and whispered conversations crime lords, pretending to be businessmen, politicians who'd been bought and paid for, women in designer gowns who looked at her with calculating interest. And through it all, In-suk never left her side. His hand found the small of her back, a constant presence that felt possessive and protective in equal measure. He introduced her to his associates with practiced civility, but Keely felt the tension radiating from him, the way his fingers would tighten against her spine whenever someone's gaze lingered too long on her exposed skin. "Your wife is stunning, In-suk," one of the older board members said, his eyes traveling over Keely in a way that made her skin crawl. Quite the departure from your usual restraint. In-suk's hand pressed harder against her back. My wife is off limits for commentary. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course. Just an observation. They moved through the crowd, In-suk's body a wall of controlled fury beside her. Keely could feel eyes tracking them, conversations stopping and starting in their wake. She'd wanted to be visible, but this attention felt different, sharper, more dangerous. You're angry, she murmured when they had a moment of relative privacy near the champagne fountain. I'm not angry. But his jaw was so tight it could crack diamonds. Then what are you? In-suk finally looked at her. Really looked at her. And what she saw in his dark eyes made her heart stutter. It wasn't anger. It was something rawer, more visceral. Hunger mixed with fury, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. Careful, Keely, he said softly, dangerously. You have no idea what you've started. Before she could respond, a man approached younger than most of the crowd, handsome in an obvious way, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Keely recognized him from photos in In-suk's office, Director Kim, one of his rivals within the syndicate. In-suk, Mrs. Baek. Kim's gaze slid over Keely like oil. May I say, your wife is absolutely radiant tonight. You may not. In-suk's voice could have frozen blood. Kim laughed, reaching out to touch Keely's arm in what might have been meant as a friendly gesture. Come now, surely. He didn't finish the sentence. In-suk's hand shot out, catching Kim's wrist in a grip that made the other man's face go white. The movement was so fast, so controlled, that no one else in the immediate vicinity seemed to notice. But Keely saw the way Kim's bones shifted under In-suk's fingers, saw the flash of genuine pain cross his face. Touch my wife again, In-suk said quietly, and I'll break every bone in your hand. Slowly, he released Kim, who stumbled back, cradling his wrist. Around them, conversations had stopped. People were staring now, sensing blood in the water. In-suk turned to Keely, his expression blank except for his eyes. His eyes were burning. We're leaving, but the gala, now. His hand closed around her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to communicate that this wasn't negotiable. He pulled her through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers, moving with singular purpose toward the exit. They burst out into the night air, rain hammering down in sheets. In-suk didn't stop for the car, didn't even look back to see if she was keeping up in her heels. He dragged her down the steps, and by the time they reached the town car, they were both soaked. The driver took one look at In-suk's face and started the engine without a word. Inside the car, water dripped from Keely's hair onto the leather seats. Her emerald dress clung to her skin, the satin darkened with rain. She could feel In-suk beside her, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled breaths, his suit jacket plastered to his shoulders. What the hell was that? Keely demanded, finding her voice. You nearly broke that man's wrist. I should have broken it. In-suk turned to her, and the look on his face stopped her cold. Do you have any idea what could have happened in there? What kind of attention you drew? I wore a dress, In-suk. I didn't commit a crime. You don't understand. He ran a hand through his wet hair, destroying what was left of his perfect styling. In my world, showing weakness gets you killed. And tonight, he cut himself off, jaw clenching. You what? Keely pressed, her heart racing. In-suk looked at her. Really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. Tonight I showed everyone in that room exactly what my weakness is. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. The car pulled up to the penthouse, but neither of them moved. Rain pounded against the windows, cocooning them in sound. I don't understand, Keely whispered, though part of her did. Part of her had felt it all night, the possessiveness in his touch, the fury in his eyes every time someone looked at her. You will, In-suk said roughly. He opened the car door, rain immediately soaking him again. Come on. They rode the elevator in silence, tension coiling tighter with each floor. By the time they reached the penthouse, Keely's hands were shaking. She didn't know if it was from the cold or the way Insuk was looking at her like she was something precious and dangerous that he couldn't decide whether to protect or destroy. Inside the penthouse, water pooled on the marble floor beneath them. Keely's teeth were chattering now, her bare shoulders covered in goosebumps. She needed to change, to get out of this wet dress and process what had just happened. She moved toward the master suite, muscle memory guiding her to where her makeshift bed waited on the floor. She'd grab dry clothes from the closet, change in the guest bathroom like always, and, "Where are you going?" Insuk's voice stopped her cold. Keely turned, confused. To change. To get ready for bed. His eyes tracked to the pillow on the floor, visible through the open bedroom door, and something feral crossed his face. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was right there, close enough that she could see water droplets clinging to his eyelashes, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold rain. "Not there," Insuk growled. His hand came up, fingers wrapping around her wrist, not tight, not painful, but absolutely immovable. "Not anymore," Keely's breath caught. "What?" "I'm breaking the contract." His thumb stroked across her pulse point, and she knew he could feel her heart racing. "Rule number 2 is void, effective immediately." The world tilted. 3 months of sleeping on the floor, of being invisible, of believing she meant nothing to this man, and now he was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered, like he was drowning and she was air. "Insuk." His name came out breathless, uncertain. "Tell me to stop." His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Tell me you want to go back to the way things were, and I'll never touch you again. I'll honor the contract until it expires, and you'll never have to see me after that." Keely's mind was spinning. This was the man who'd forced her to sleep on the floor, who'd treated her like furniture for 3 months. But she thought of the pastries on the counter, the heater by her bed, the way his hand had been on her back all night like he couldn't bear to not be touching her. She thought of how he'd nearly broken a man's wrist for daring to touch her arm. She didn't know what she wanted to say. Her body was making its own decisions, swaying toward him despite every logical reason to pull away. Insuk's eyes searched hers, desperate and dark and absolutely undone. When she didn't tell him to stop, when she let herself lean into his touch, something in him snapped. He pulled her toward the bedroom, toward the bed she'd never been allowed to sleep in, and Keely went. The contract was broken, and neither of them knew if what came next would be salvation or destruction. But as Insuk's hands tangled in her wet hair, as he looked at her like she was something he'd die to protect, Keely realized she didn't care about the answer. She was finally, devastatingly visible, and there was no going back. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, cold and gray. Keely woke slowly, disoriented by the softness beneath her, the expensive sheets tangled around her legs, the lingering scent of Insuk's cologne on the pillow beside her, the bed. She was in the bed. Everything from the night before came rushing back: the gala, the rain, the way Insuk had looked at her like she was something precious he couldn't bear to lose, the way he'd pulled her toward this bed, breaking his own contract, his composure finally devastatingly shattered. Keely turned her head, expecting to find him beside her. The space was empty. Cold. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, scanning the master suite. No sign of him. His side of the bed was made with military precision, as if he'd erased all evidence of his presence. On the nightstand sat a single piece of paper, folded once. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Buy whatever you want. Card is in the top drawer." That was it. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what had happened between them. Just a credit card and permission to spend his money, like she was a mistress he needed to appease rather than the wife he'd claimed last night with such desperate intensity. Something cold and sick settled in Keely's stomach. She'd been a fool. Again. She'd let herself believe that Insuk's possessiveness meant something real, that the fire in his eyes had been more than just lust or wounded pride. But this note, impersonal, transactional, told her everything she needed to know. To him, she was still just part of the contract, just in a different capacity now. Keely dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, her fingers fumbling with the zipper. She needed to leave, needed air, needed to think somewhere that didn't smell like him and broken promises. She'd go to her father's house, maybe stay there for a few days until she could process what had happened. She grabbed her purse and headed for the penthouse door, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The elevator was just ahead, freedom within reach. Two men in dark suits materialized in the hallway, blocking her path. She recognized them as In-suk's security detail, the ones who usually stood outside the penthouse. Mrs. Beck. The taller one stepped forward, his expression apologetic but firm. "I'm afraid you can't leave right now." Keely's heart lurched. "Excuse me? Boss's orders. High alert protocol. No one enters or exits without his direct approval." "You're not serious." But she could see from their faces that they absolutely were. "I'm not a prisoner. I'm just going to visit my father." "We have orders to keep you safe, ma'am." The second guard's hand rested near his concealed weapon, a subtle reminder of exactly what kind of world she'd married into. "Mr. Bake will be back soon. You can discuss it with him then." Rage flooded through her, hot and clarifying. This was what In-suk did. He made decisions about her life without consultation, without consent. He'd taken her to bed and then locked her in his tower like some kind of prize he'd won. "Tell your boss," Keely said, her voice shaking with fury, "that when he gets back, we're going to have a conversation about boundaries. And if he doesn't like it, he can sleep on the goddamn floor." She spun on her heel and stormed back into the penthouse, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. In-suk returned 3 hours later, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. He looked like he'd been in meetings all morning or interrogations, given his line of work. Keely was waiting for him in the living room, her anger having evolved from hot rage into something colder and more dangerous. He stopped when he saw her, wariness flickering across his features. "You're awake." "I've been awake for hours." Keely stood, crossing her arms. "Your guards wouldn't let me leave." "I know." He set his jacket on the back of a chair, not quite meeting her eyes. "It's for your safety. My safety." She laughed, bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" In-suk's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you got what you wanted last night, and now I'm locked in here like some kind of—" She cut herself off, too angry to find the right words. "That note. Buy whatever you want. Did you really think money would—" "It's not about money." In-suk's voice was sharp, strained. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me." Keely's composure cracked. "Explain why your guards are holding me hostage. Explain why you won't look at me. Explain what last night meant, or if it meant anything at all." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't indifference. It was fear, raw and barely controlled. "Last night, I made a mistake," In-suk said quietly. "At the gala. The way I touched you, the way I reacted to Kim, I showed everyone in that room that you matter to me. And in my world, that's the same as painting a target on your back." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "What are you saying?" Keely's anger was bleeding away, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. In-suk moved to the window, his shoulders rigid. "There are factions within the syndicate who would love nothing more than to see me fail, to see me weakened. For 3 months, you were safe because everyone believed you were just a contract, a piece of paperwork. But now," his hands clenched into fists, "now they know you're more than that, which means they'll use you to get to me. So you're keeping me locked up? For how long?" "As long as it takes to neutralize the threat." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Or until I can send you somewhere safe. Out of the country, maybe. Somewhere they can't reach you. No. The word came out firm. Absolute. Insuk blinked. No, I'm not leaving. Keely stepped closer, her heart pounding. And I'm not going to be locked in this penthouse while you make decisions about my life. If I'm really in danger, then tell me the truth. All of it. Stop hiding behind your rules and your control and your goddamn fear, and tell me why you actually care whether I live or die. Something cracked in his composure. You want the truth? Yes. Insuk closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity in his eyes. The truth is that I've wanted you since the first time I saw you, 2 years before we married. The truth is that I bought your father's debt, specifically to have leverage to bind you to me because I didn't know any other way. The truth is that I made you sleep on the floor, not because I hated you, but because I have violent night terrors and I was terrified I'd hurt you in my sleep. Keely's world tilted. What? The truth is that every night for 3 months, I lay awake watching you sleep on that floor, hating myself for putting you there but too afraid of what I might do to you if you were in my bed. His thumb traced her cheekbone, his voice breaking. And the truth is that last night, when I finally claimed you, I knew I was condemning you. I knew I was making you a target. And I did it anyway because I'm selfish, and I wanted you more than I wanted to keep you safe. Tears burned in Keely's eyes. You bought my father's debt? 2 years ago? Yes. No apology in his voice, just stark honesty. I orchestrated everything. The marriage, the contract, all of it. I'm not a good man, Keely. I'm possessive and controlling, and I've spent 2 years manipulating circumstances to make you mine. So if you want to hate me, you have every right. She should hate him. She should be furious at the manipulation, at the way he'd controlled her life before she even knew he existed. But all she could think about was the heater by her sleeping spot, the pastries on the counter, the way he'd nearly broken a man's wrist for touching her. Why? She whispered. Why go through all of this? Insuk's forehead dropped to touch hers, his eyes closing. Because I'm in love with you. I have been since the moment I saw you laughing in your father's office, and I didn't know how to tell you without sounding like a madman, so I became your husband instead. Before Keely could respond, before she could process the weight of that confession, Insuk's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, and whatever he saw on the screen made all the color drain from his face. What? Keely asked, fear spiking through her. What is it? Get to the safe room, now. His voice had gone deadly calm, the voice he used when violence was imminent. Don't argue, just... A burst of static came from his earpiece. Sir, we have multiple hostiles in the building. The guard's voice cut off with a choked gasp, followed by the unmistakable sound of suppressed gunfire. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Keely heard footsteps in the hallway. Too many of them, moving with military precision. Through the chaos, she heard gunfire, Insuk's guards fighting back, but they were overwhelmed. Insuk shoved her toward the panic room hidden behind a false wall in his office, but they didn't make it 3 steps before the penthouse door exploded inward. Men in tactical gear flooded in, stepping over the bodies of the guards, weapons drawn. Insuk pushed Keely behind him, his body a shield, but there were too many of them. She saw the gun barrel swing toward his head, tried to scream a warning. Everything went black. Keely woke to the smell of rust and seawater. Her head throbbed, and when she tried to move, she realized her wrists were bound behind her back. She was sitting in a metal chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, judging by the corrugated walls and concrete floor. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting skeletal shadows. She's awake. A man's voice, cultured and cold. Keely's vision focused on the figure standing in front of her. He was older than Insuk, maybe mid-40s, with gray at his temples and eyes like chips of ice. She recognized him from photos in Insuk's office, Director Han, one of his most dangerous rivals and Director Kim's superior within the syndicate's opposition faction. Mrs. Beck. Han smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Welcome. I apologize for the accommodations, but this seemed like an appropriate location. After all, this is the same shipping dock where you signed your marriage contract, isn't it? Poetic, I thought. Fear clawed at Keely's throat, but she forced herself to speak. What do you want? What I want is irrelevant. What In-suk wants, that's the interesting question. Han crouched in front of her, his expression almost pitying. Do you know why he really married you, Mrs. Beck? Has he told you the whole truth? I know enough. Do you? Han pulled out his phone, scrolling to something. Did he tell you that he bought your father's debt 2 years ago? That he's been orchestrating your life, manipulating circumstances to force you into marriage? Did he tell you that this was all just an elaborate game to him? The words landed like physical blows, confirming what In-suk had already confessed, but somehow making it sound worse, more calculated. He told me. Keely's voice shook. He told me everything. Han's eyebrows rose. Did he? How refreshingly honest of him. And you still defend him? I don't have to defend him to you. Perhaps not. Han stood, pocketing his phone. But you might want to start praying he values you more than his empire, because that's the choice I'm going to give him, you, or everything he's built. And something tells me In-suk Beck doesn't make sacrifices for anyone. Keely wanted to argue, wanted to tell this man he was wrong, but doubt crept in, cold and insidious. In-suk had spent 3 months treating her like furniture. He'd orchestrated her entire life to bind her to him. Would he really give up his empire to save her? Or would she be just another calculated loss? She didn't have to wait long for the answer. An hour later, or maybe 3, time had lost meaning. The warehouse's main door screeched open. In-suk walked in alone, unarmed, his suit jacket gone and his white shirt stark against the darkness. Even from across the warehouse, Keely could see the tension in his shoulders, the controlled fury in every line of his body. Let her go, Han. In-suk's voice echoed in the empty space. This is between you and me. Han laughed, the sound bouncing off metal walls. Oh, but she's so much more effective than anything between you and me. Look at you, the great In-suk Beck, walking in here without backup, without weapons, all for a woman you claimed was just a contract. In-suk's eyes found Keely's across the space, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not calculation, not strategy, just raw, desperate fear. Kim sends his regards, Han said with a cold smile. After your little display at the gala, he convinced me that you'd finally shown us your weakness. Turns out he was right. Name your terms, In-suk said. Kneel. Han gestured to the ground in front of him. Kneel. Sign over control of the syndicate, and I'll let her go. The warehouse went silent. Keely watched In-suk's face, waiting for him to negotiate, to find some clever way out of this trap. But instead, he moved forward without hesitation, lowering himself to his knees in front of his greatest rival. In-suk. No. Keely's voice cracked. Don't. Quiet. Han's hand moved to his weapon. Mr. Beck is making his choice, but In-suk wasn't looking at Han. He was looking at Keely, and his expression was so full of love and apology that it broke her heart. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Then he moved. It happened so fast that Keely barely processed it. One moment In-suk was kneeling, the next he was a blur of controlled violence. He swept Han's legs out from under him, disarmed him before he hit the ground, and turned the gun on Han's men as they rushed forward. Gunshots cracked through the air. Keely screamed, fighting against her restraints. She saw In-suk take down 2 men with brutal efficiency, saw him use one as a shield when another opened fire. And then she saw the blood bloom across his shoulder as he threw himself in front of her, taking a bullet that had been aimed at her head. In-suk staggered but didn't fall, pure adrenaline keeping him upright. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession, and Han's remaining men dropped. Then he turned to Han himself, who was scrambling backward, fear finally showing in his eyes. You made a mistake, In-suk said quietly, dangerously. though his voice was strained with pain. You threatened what's mine. He kicked Han hard in the temple, knocking him unconscious, then turned to Keely. Blood soaked his shirt, dripping onto the concrete, but his hands were gentle as he cut through her restraints. Are you hurt? His voice was rough, pain threading through it. Did they touch you? You're bleeding. Keely's hands went to his shoulder, trying to staunch the flow. Insuk. I'm fine, but he wasn't. She could see the tremor in his hands, the way his face had gone pale. We need to leave. My men are outside. He tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Keely caught him, her arms wrapping around his waist, taking as much of his weight as she could. You're not fine, she said, tears streaming down her face. You took a bullet for me. You goddamn idiot, you could have died. Worth it. Insuk's hand came up to cup her face, leaving a smear of blood on her cheek. You're worth everything. My empire, my life, all of it. I need you to know that. Keely kissed him then, desperate and scared, tasting salt and copper. When she pulled back, sirens were wailing in the distance, and Insuk's men were flooding the warehouse. Get him to a hospital, she ordered the first man who reached them. Now. The hospital lights were too bright, too sterile. Keely sat in the waiting room for 3 hours while doctors extracted the bullet from Insuk's shoulder and repaired the damage. He'd lost a lot of blood but would survive. The words should have been comforting, but she couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing him throw himself in front of that bullet. He'd been willing to die for her. This man who'd manipulated her life, who'd kept her at arm's length for 3 months, he'd been willing to give up everything to keep her safe. When they finally let her in to see him, Insuk was asleep, his shoulder bandaged, his face slack with exhaustion and painkillers. Keely sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand, careful of the IV lines, and let herself cry. She cried for the 3 months she'd spent sleeping on the floor. She cried for the loneliness, the confusion, the way she'd convinced herself she meant nothing to him. She cried for the fact that he'd loved her all along but hadn't known how to show it without his rules and contracts and careful control. And she cried because she loved him too, this complicated, damaged man who'd bought her father's debt and orchestrated a marriage and nearly died to prove she mattered more than his empire. Insuk stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her, relief and something like fear crossed his face. You're still here, he rasped. Where else would I be? Keely squeezed his hand. You took a bullet for me, you idiot. I'd take 100. He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. Keely, I need to tell you, I know. You love me. You manipulated everything to make me yours. You're possessive and controlling and completely insane. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his uninjured shoulder. And I'm so angry at you for all of it. But I also... Her voice broke. I also understand why you did it. And I think I might be falling in love with you too, which makes me just as insane. Insuk's hand came up to tangle in her hair, holding her close. You don't have to love me. You don't have to forgive me. Just don't leave. Please don't leave. I'm not leaving. Keely pulled back to look at him. But things are going to change. No more making decisions about my life without consulting me. No more locking me in the penthouse. No more treating me like I'm something you have to protect from the world. If we're doing this, if we're making this marriage real, then we do it as equals. Equals. Insuk tested the word like it was foreign to him. Then slowly, he nodded. I can try. I won't be good at it. But I can try. That's all I'm asking. They kept him in the hospital for 2 more days, monitoring for infection. When they finally released him, Insuk insisted on going home despite the doctor's protests about rest and recovery. Keely helped him into the penthouse, supporting his weight as they made their way to the master suite. Insuk stopped at the threshold, looking at the bed, then at the empty spot on the floor where Keely's makeshift pallet used to be. His expression was unreadable. I should sleep somewhere else, he said quietly. The guest room, maybe. I don't the night terrors. I could hurt you. In-suk. Keely turned to face him, her hands on his chest. You took a bullet for me. You knelt for me. You would have given up your entire empire to keep me safe. Do you really think I'm afraid of you having a nightmare? You should be. His voice was raw. I've woken up swinging before. Then I'll wake you up. She guided him toward the bed, carefully avoiding his injured shoulder. And if you have a nightmare, we'll deal with it together. That's what equals do. In-suk looked at her like she was something miraculous he didn't deserve. Then, slowly, he nodded.